Thank you for coming back again. We have only one session this afternoon. We have 45 minutes and then a break and then another hour. And one of the main elements I wanted to deal with, you see it on your program, is corruption, which is allied to investigative reporting, because investigative reporters very often report on corruption. Corruption in government, corruption in business, corruption everywhere. And one of the interesting questions that we journalists have to ask ourselves is how far does reporting on corruption and making it clear who are corrupt and how much the corruption has cost the country. We should ask ourselves, how far is that reporting valuable? How far does it decrease, lessen the amount of corruption? Some time ago now, I did a seminar in India where until very recently, where now the journalism is becoming less free, but say 10 years ago, journalism in India was fairly free. There were problems, and India is a huge country, as you know, and there were, in different areas, there were different laws and rules and customs and so on. But by and large, especially at the national level, journalists could report fairly freely, which is no longer the case. However, the more free journalism has become, the more the investigative reporters in India, of whom there are many, reported on corruption. Corruption grew. Not, I think, because of the reporting, but in spite of the reporting. So, if that is the case, when we report on corruption, it doesn't have any effect, or even an opposite effect on the amount of corruption there is, we have to ask ourselves why. What is happening? Why is it not the case that when a corrupt person or a corrupt organization is revealed, shown to be corrupt, and perhaps something happens to that person or that organization, but nevertheless the amount of corruption still goes up. And that's true not just in India, but in many other cases as well. So, it's one of the things we should talk about, I think. But first, we have a colleague who is waiting to talk to us from Bulgaria. His name is Vladimir Mitev. He's been a journalist for many years. He's also worked in NGOs. He's now he's had a career mainly in mainly in radio. He's also knows and has reported on Romania for many years. So I want to bring him in first to talk a bit about that subject and his impressions on what's happening in Bulgaria, and also, to a degree at least, to compare the situation in Bulgaria, a neighboring country, with the situation here in Romania. So, Vladimir, can you hear and can you see?
Yes, I hear and see. Yes.
Hear and see. That's
hello to everyone.
That's good. Hearing and seeing is good. First question really is, arising from what I've just said, how far in Bulgaria, and in your experience also in Romania by comparison, how far are issues of corruption and indeed anti-corruption at the center of government and also at the center of journalism? How far do journalists try to report on it, and how prevalent is it? In Bulgaria at the moment, Bulgaria is now 78, number 78 in the so-called Transparency Index of corruption. And as you know, the lower down you are on the scale, the more corruption there is. Romania is a bit higher at 66, so it's kind of in the middle of the scale. Bulgaria is slightly over the middle towards the bottom. How far is that an issue in Bulgaria, and how far is the government trying to do something about it, and how far is journalism able to report on it?
I would say that the situation has been dynamic in the last years, and we all remember that Romania had the so-called golden era of anti-corruption under Laura Kövesi as the chief prosecutor of the DNA anti-corruption agency. But eventually that stopped at a certain moment. And in the recent times in Bulgaria, there has been certainly a lot of talk about anti-corruption. Let me just remember that we had for a long time the governance of Boyko Borisov, who is perceived by many people as some kind of those Balkan politicians who are essentially corrupt for a number of reasons. But of course, it was never, there isn't some case going on against him. And there were protests on anti-corruption basis in 2020, which took down eventually or led to the situation in which the government of Borisov left. However, in Bulgaria, as you may know if you have listened to the news, there is some difficulty to form a government in the last months. There is, of course, this talk on anti-corruption. There are people who believe that, for example, that the Bulgarian chief prosecutor is doing anti-corruption in a corrupt way and he has to be changed. And I would say there is a lot of talk, often or sometimes at high pitch, but beyond the talk, there isn't really any significant operation or situation in which some case is brought to completion and somebody who is, for example, high-ranking politician or some other representative of economic interest goes to jail because of corruption. I don't know if you get a good introductory picture to that, but let me say that corruption is a complex issue and it may be used as well as some kind of a tool to fight for political affirmation. Maybe you know that there is so-called techno-populist tendency in various societies, which often is also having anti-corruption in its agenda. And there are also other tendencies which are perceived as more related to oligarchy. So let's say more corrupt from some point of view. But this balance is dynamic in any society.
Yeah. We were talking earlier this morning about these issues, and one of the things that came up and was talked about a good deal were actually as you say, the oligarchs, the owners of the media, and how far the owners of the media were close to the political parties, and how far journalism could be said to be free. That is, that the owners and or the parties both had a large influence upon what was written or what was broadcast, what was on the web. Is that also the case in Bulgaria? In other words, do journalists say about their journalism, I wanted to write this, but actually I couldn't do it because of pressure from above?
I would say that media or journalists can write whatever they want. There is no really, in the times of social networks, you're really free and nobody can stop you to publish anything. It can even gain traction if you're an influencer or somehow reach a lot of shares, etc. But I would say that we are also responsible for what we publish. And here the situation becomes more complex in the sense that journalists are not, or media, especially media which are, let's say, trying to have some better editorial standards and not be just some superstructure of economic interests. These media usually don't have big budgets. And now the problem appears what happens when these media somehow harm or threaten strong economic interests. I can give an example even from this week in which we are. A media which is generally seen as having anti-corruption agenda, which is in line also with our issue, here published something which is not even very strong, or it's not even an investigation. Basically, basing itself on some press release from the financial ministry, it claimed that there is certain problem with an insurance company. And following this report, the insurance company filed a claim at the court at the value of 1 million leva, which is roughly 500,000 euro, against this media. And it is in fact a media which, first of all, it's not a big media. It doesn't have a big budget. Even its editor-in-chief said that this sum is maybe larger than 2 years' income or turnover of the media. So if the court decides that there is some harmful or unprofessional behavior in this case, the media would have to close. So this type of claims are called SLAP, and maybe our public is familiar with this term. It's an abbreviation for strategic lawsuit against public participation, and they're getting more and more in Bulgaria. Basically, we have already reached a situation in which journalists have to have really very, very precise, very well-funded writing on anything they write. Because if some strong, as I said, strong financial interests, or there are even companies which can claim damages of millions of euro, and such cases, they're very frightening for the free press, or even for the attempts of a free press. So they're also discouraging, I think, my colleagues from doing real work which may harm somebody. Maybe you know the famous phrase by George Orwell that journalism is when you publish something which somebody doesn't want to have it published. Yeah. And when you are publishing everything that is okay for everyone, it's a PR. So we are, for a number of reasons, we are discouraged to engage in such contestation of any authority which is strong economic authority. Yeah. You can imagine that it is not good for the press freedom in Bulgaria.
Just so that I and everybody here understands what you're saying, Vladimir, the SLAP thing, which is it's a legal vehicle which has been brought in by the government.
No, it's I can't say it's a legal vehicle in this sense that some government promotes it, but it's a term which I think is used by the European Union or other, or somehow Reporters Without Borders, such type of international organizations to mark this type of cases in which journalists are threatened with very huge costs, possibly because some strong financial interests are harmed.
Sorry to interrupt you, but if they are brought to court and threatened with fines or, as you say, very large costs, that is usually brought in by a company which alleges that it's been unfairly treated.
Yes, exactly.
So it's more companies that do this than government.
Yes.
And what you're saying is that it is so costly if you lose a case, or even if you win it, you have to pay the costs for your defense. That journalists are now inhibited. They fear the results of losing a case so much that they will not write what they know or what they think they know.
Yes, basically that's my message.
And from your knowledge, is that this? Well, you can discuss it here with Romanian journalists. Is that the case also here in Romania?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Now it's on a debate law that they want to make it official. If one NGO wants to contest an administrative decision in the court, they wanted to make it to make a deposit about 50,000 lei, so it's almost 10,000 euro.
Yeah.
And if you lose the in court, you lose this money.
You lose the money, yeah.
And our NGO, we have something like 20 per year. And in the last
20 of these every year,
yes, cases in the court.
for which you then have to put down 50,000 lei.
Until now, no. It was just a
coming,
proposal from our government. In the past, we win a lot of these cases, which the decision was to protect the virgin forest of Romania. And almost, how would say, the management plan for the forest district in different places. Sometimes they put virgin forest on for logging, and because it's a conflict, interest conflicts, because the people who is making this environment management plans are also the same that they must to put it on how to say to put it in action, to say.
Okay, put in action.
Yeah, so in the future it will be very difficult for us because we don't have a lot of money to cover all these cases.
Vladimir, are you hearing this?
Yes, I heard. Maybe you would ask me if in Bulgaria is similar situation or.
Yeah, but I mean, well, yes. Is it a similar situation? I mean, do NGOs?
I'm not aware of such problem with NGOs. At least I haven't read about it. My impression generally is that in Romania, NGOs and investigative journalists somehow are more established than in Bulgaria. Of course, it's maybe a subjective perception, but I do feel that NGOs are, of course, in any country they have influence, but in Romania, I believe they have been traditionally strong. And maybe that is, if you allow me just an interpretation, maybe that is the reason some obstacles are created against them now, because maybe they have been too strong, I don't know, and harmful to somebody.
It's the same method because they wanted now to reduce the period that you can go in a court from almost half of it. Only 30 days to find it, go in court to say we are not agreed with this. Also, it's a new thing that they wanted to do. Last week it was a protest in front of the government of Romania.
Just to make a point on this, that I hadn't realised that this was happening in Romania. The NGOs are very numerous now. I mean, in most democratic societies there are many NGOs for all kinds of things. In the UK it must be into the thousands of NGOs, big and small. But in many societies, including like the one I was talking about a minute ago, India, the NGOs are now facing the same kind of restrictions that you were talking about. It's getting more and more difficult for them to work. And that's bad for journalism, partly because some NGOs, like actually the one that Vladimir just mentioned, Reporters Without Borders, are about journalism, but also because journalists use NGOs a lot. They're centers of information, the way you go to say what's happening in the forestry, what's happening in the in fishing rights, what's happening in hospitals, and usually you will find an NGO which is concerned with that and which has much information, and so it's very valuable to us. So the more that they are closed down and unable to work properly, the worse it is for us. Vladimir, back to you. You were talking earlier about, excuse me, about the anti-corruption measures. And you were suggesting that the anti-corruption measures brought in by the government were not particularly strong.
Yes, you want me to
Yes, please.
develop the idea?
Expand on that a bit.
You know, there are different elites in any country, and especially in Bulgaria, I have a feeling of certain heterogeneity in our political elites. So we are somehow constantly, somebody is fighting against somebody. I said that maybe the public is aware that we had a government which came with anti-corruption agenda. It was the government of Petkov, which ruled from December 2021 until somewhere around August 2022. It openly said that it wants to change the person or to somehow dismiss or fire the chief prosecutor, because apparently there are from different tendencies, let's say, in the political and economic system. And it was believed that if somehow the chief prosecutor can be changed, some good anti-corruption will start. But I think it's more complex, and as everyone knows, this government went into history, and the chief prosecutor still stands. I need to maybe make a recall to the situation in 2020, when I allowed myself to write an article about the protests in Bulgaria, mentioning also Romanian anti-corruption fight, which was very popular in Bulgaria for some time. And Romanian anti-corruption fight was very strong, maybe around 2016, 2018. Eventually it was stopped. It's a big issue, of course, to comment on that, but Romanian state somehow changed its attitude, and Laura Kövesi left Romania, eventually becoming European chief prosecutor. In any case, I wrote at that moment that even though I don't have sympathies for the chief prosecutor, basically he maybe is the only person which really tried some anti-corruption, and there was a situation in which Vasil Boshkov, an important oligarch, was taken down. He's now living in Dubai. So really we need to, when we think about anti-corruption, we need to think really more complex. It's not so much good against evil. There are various contexts, and we need to be aware that Bulgaria, at least in my view, is much more oligarchical than Romania. And in Romania, there is usually this talk of strong state, stronger than in Bulgaria. So every country has its specifics when it tries to apply anti-corruption. Maybe the fact that Romania had this golden era of anti-corruption, which led to many ministers entering in prison, and eventually later led to the demission also of the chief prosecutor Kövesi, was one thing which needs to be discussed, and maybe our public knows well this situation. And in the case of Bulgaria, we see that anti-corruption is much more a talk, such a type of discourse which maybe unites some people behind the so-called more anti-corruption oriented political forces. But beyond the talk, we never really had anti-corruption experts like Romania did. I remember discussing with Romanian anti-corruption experts which were publishing articles and trying to suggest what indicators, for example, show that there is evolution in anti-corruption situation in Romania or in good governance in Romania. There was, at least from my point of view, certain attempt to not to be only a political issue, but to really somehow modernize society and bring people in this process. In Bulgaria, I'm not aware even of significant anti-corruption experts, and maybe that is a sign that only now, or until recently, there was never such a strong effort to do anti-corruption.
Well, let's throw it open to you. There was a time, I thought, and I think that Vladimir was right about that, in Romania, where, and I've now forgotten the name of the prosecutor, a woman.
Kövesi.
Laura, that's right, who's now at the European Union. Chief prosecutor, yeah. And actually there was a very big corruption case is now going on in the European Union that she must be involved with. But would you say that when she was military prosecutor here, that was a golden age, relatively? In other words, that corruption cases were examined, taken, and had an effect?
Are you asking me?
No, I'm asking the Romanians first.
Okay.
I come back to you. What do you think?
I think it was a flourishing period, and Romanians learned that that is possible, that corrupt high powerful figures can be prosecuted.
Right.
I don't know if it was a golden age, because some voices criticized the direction the prosecutors were going, but yeah, for sure it was a flourishing period for people to be brought to justice.
And people, mainly I think politicians, did go to jail and stuff.
Yes, there were some sentencings. But, well, actually just yesterday there was a new sentence for corruption. An oligarch from the Moldova region of Romania was sentenced to jail, but the new problem in Romania is that these people are sentenced to jail, but by the time the sentence is public, they have left Romania already. And so the civil society and journalists are now questioning why the authorities are not, because obviously the police knows it's going to be a sentencing. These people might have fled the country, and it's not just one case. There's been many cases these people have fled the country. It's the day of the sentencing.
And they go to Dubai. Dubai must be.
They go in Europe.
They go.
I was going to say Dubai must be one of the richest countries in the world, full of people who can't be anywhere else. But that's not true. Where do they go? They go all over.
He's like, apparently went to Italy, but I'm not sure if he's still in Italy. We had our ex-minister of tourism, Elena Udrea, famous politician in Romania, which was sentenced and ran to Bulgaria.
Ah,
But she was not there, and they sent her back to us.
I would like to say is not even a thought of golden age, not to say, because
you think that there wasn't a golden age?
no, because this cases was very visible at the time, was big time, big shots, but never from the revolution until now, we don't have the anti-corruption fight to the local level. The big corruption is the local level. There are big money there too, but no prosecutor going to the local level.
Well, not even the prosecutors in the
About
local level?
about DNA, the famous DNA have a department, the Alba Iulia, which is the the weak department of DNA. They don't have not even one case, serious case.
With Koveshi, it was just a small flame.
Exactly.
Maybe you can say that it was a golden age because it had a lot of impact around the Romanians or in the region, because we saw a lot of the very important figures going to jail or being sentenced. But on the other side, a lot of people got angry, and a lot of people said that there was a big controversy around the technicalities of how those cases were built, using
secret services.
Yeah, using collaborations with secret services, using mandate for national security, which after the Constitutional Court said that there wasn't the case because corruption is not a problem of national security. So, I don't know, after she left the country, it's like she lost a big part of the support that she had before when she was in position. And now,
People didn't like her leaving.
yeah, I think that the civil society didn't like her leaving.
But I think she had to leave. She lost her job.
Yes.
Yes.
So she had to
Of course,
leave.
yeah, she had to leave because she lost her job, yeah.
Yeah.
But the level of corruption is the same. Nothing changed.
Well, one of the things that when I was living in Moscow, that was quite prevalent, this was of course after the fall of the Soviet Union, that corruption started at the very lowest level. So if you were driving a car, and in Moscow all the cars had special number plates, and if you were a correspondent you had a number plate with car, K, and in this case 1. Britain was the first in the number plate race. One time when I went out to see a friend in a restaurant, and because I knew that the law in Moscow, in Russia, was that you could not drink anything. Any alcohol in the blood would be a crime. So I drank a non-alcoholic beer. But non-alcoholic beer, as you may know, smells like beer. So anyway, I was driving back from the restaurant to home, and I was flagged down by a guy, the traffic police, and he put his head into the window and smelled my breath and said, you're drunk. And I said, no, it was non-alcoholic beer. He said, yeah. So we talked a bit, argued a bit, and he said, no, well, if you don't admit, I must take you to the office. This was about midnight. So we went to the main office of the Gospodarstvenny Автомобильный Inspectorate at midnight. And there was only one light on in the building, quite high up. And we went up the fire escape to this lighted room. And in the lighted room was a woman wearing a very dirty white overall, who the policeman addressed as Comrade Doctor, and said, Comrade Doctor, he saluted and said, this man is drunk, or I suspect that he's drunk, he needs to have a breathalyzer test. So she brought out from a drawer somewhat ancient breathalyzer equipment and asked me to blow into it. I blew into it, thinking this is fine, I haven't got any alcohol in my blood. She took it back, sort of hid it under her bosom, and looked at it, and then said, yeah, he's drunk. The one person in the room who was drunk was her. So the man said, this is very, very, very serious. You will be caught drunk driving. I must impound your car and take you to the police station. It's Friday evening, and you cannot phone your embassy until Monday. So I thought, oh God, 2 days in a cell. And then so I said, look, is there a way of settling this now? Making clear what I was talking about. And he said, there is a way. He said, $150. So luckily for me, or unluckily perhaps, I had $150. So I gave it to him. He saluted me and said, "Spasibo," and let me go. Drunk, obviously, and a danger to motorists, but clearly I was okay. My point of this sad story is that that's where corruption starts. Here was I, a British citizen, paying an officer of the law in Moscow, itself a large offence, simply in order not to be put in the jail cell for 2 days. And that seems to me to be how corruption works. And it certainly worked there. In other words, it starts where an official, a state official, has got some power over you. And of course, the traffic police is a very obvious one. How far is that? But in neighboring Georgia, for a while at least, when Saakashvili was president, he got the police to be more or less clean. It had been quite corrupt. He cleaned it up. Actually, quite a lot of the rest of Georgian society remained fairly corrupt, but the police, for some reason, I think they got a pay rise and so on. how far is there in Romania and Vladimir in Bulgaria, how far does corruption start at a low level? In other words, giving a policeman a bribe in order not to be fined, or something like it.
I myself am not a driver, but I have heard various stories even from Romanians traveling through Bulgaria until a few years ago, which were basically mocking Bulgarian policemen for some reasons related to these such situations. But as far as I know, there has been this practice that there are no longer so much traffic policemen on the roads between the cities. And in fact, there are cameras which record the speed of the vehicles. So I think modernization through such measures reduces the small corruption. But let me once again repeat my thesis about the Romania, which has anti-corruption experts and Bulgaria doesn't have. I remember some years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, I discussed and maybe interviewed a person who had calculated the small corruption, the medium corruption, and the high corruption in Romania in terms of damages which they bring. And there were some methods. It was an NGO person. So basically, at that moment, even maybe 10 or maybe even a little bit more years, in Romania, it was known generally, or there were some figures, there were some calculations, what are the levels of corruption in different types. And I have never heard in Bulgaria, maybe there are, of course, I don't know, but I at least don't know such studies in Bulgaria, how much is the small corruption harming the state budget or the economy, what is the level of medium corruption, etc.
But what then, just asking you generally, what do you make of the theory is, or the writing on corruption is that really corrupt societies start from the bottom. They may start from the top, but they permeate, they go through the bottom as well, if you can say, the police at the bottom of the society. So the whole society is complicit in some kind of corruption. That if you want another flat, you pay the agency. If you want some good medical care, you pay the hospital and the doctor, and so on. So it just goes on. Everybody assumes that some of the payments they will have to make in any given day or any given month will be essentially a bribe. And it's so common that nobody ever, well, people complain about it, but nothing happens much. Is that a picture of what Romanian society now is? Or is it partly that and partly not that? Was it like that and now getting better? What do you reckon?
I think it's decreasing.
Decreasing?
Yes.
It's decreasing, but you can still see it
Speak louder.
It's decreasing, but you can still see it in schools, hospitals, or some institutions. And I think that bribery is deeply ingrained in our culture in a way. I had encountered, when I wrote this with persons with disabilities, they thought that even journalists need to be paid, I guess, because they tried to give me something because I was writing about them. So it's deeply ingrained. We are thinking that we need to give someone something if they do something good for us, if they do something or favor.
It's quite common to be asked when you are working with some people about their cases. They are asking you, I need to pay you.
Mm-hmm.
Last week happened to me. I was working on a case with a woman who had some problems with some doctors from a small hospital. I wrote her story, and at the end she asked me, do you need to pay some money?
Yeah.
So it's quite common to be asked if they need to pay money.
Of course, you said sure, how much? But you're saying that's happened to you before, or it's happened to colleagues, or?
Also, it happened before.
Yeah.
If you are working with, I don't know, with the part of society that is not so very well educated about how the press works.
I think that a
Or
lot
is
of,
educated.
I think that a lot of the mentality has its roots in the communist era, or back when our parents didn't really have access to a lot of food, a lot of services, and if you knew someone that
Yeah.
had access to that, if you had good connection, if you could trade them something, then you would be privileged,
Yeah.
even in a society of poverty and of limited access to anything. So I think part of our mentality today is rooted in that. People still think it's good to solve something, to have a connection here and there. But I also see in my work, and also just in my private life, that my generation is, I think, doing a good job in trying to have a fair life, to live a fair life, and are not accepting this kind of system and this kind of thoughts.
That's interesting, and so that's a decision you've, as it were, taken individually and
I think so.
corporately.
Being part of the European Union, many people have traveled, have lived abroad. They saw the democratic way of acting. They now know that this is not fair. The hospital shouldn't treat you this way. The policeman shouldn't treat you this way. And many, actually, in my newspaper, we do have cases where people come to us and tell us, "This, could you write about this, because this is not fair. This has happened to me. This is against my rights." So I think people are becoming more aware of the fact that we don't have to be a mob of people. We can be a society.
I'm agreed with you. That's why I'm saying that is decreasing. But the perspective is changing. It's not coming. The corruption is not coming anymore from the bottom to the top. It's coming from the top to the bottom. Because in my investigation, when I was in the forest field, there was students that finished University of Forest, and they wanted to go in the system in Rom Silva, and they asked for them from them 40,000 euros. For example, to be in a small district.
40,000
Yes, euro.
euro, yeah.
So it's coming from the top, and the amount of money it's increasing because of the government.
Do you people agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think a lot of corruption is tolerated by authorities, if not perpetuated by authorities.
Yeah. But
But
suppose
it's
someone
much
came-
worse like this.
Sorry, go on.
It's much worse like this. It's much worse.
If this was happening, say you were in a local paper, local website, whatever, and you learned that this was happening, not just one instance, but several instances, would you write about it?
Yes, if you can prove it, if you can have an objective view, because we were talking about the slaps and the lawsuits. In my editorial office, we have a lawyer which works with us, and we do have some lawsuits, also one or two slaps recently, but we got out of them okay, because they were not really serious. Yeah, I think when we have to write, when we write a kind of this story, we have to have some kind of proof, because it's a serious accusation, so
Yes.
you have to have your backup.
I come to you, sorry, anybody else want to come in before? We're gonna, yes. Gentleman at the back.
Can I make a comment? If the conclusion is that it is coming still from the top, then surely what Koveshi was doing was attacking the top,
Yes.
and which was the right thing to do. I know ultimately, she was thrown out, and then stories came afterwards that they'd been using the secret services to get information on the people that they were taking to the DNA. But the principle was right, and I think they should do it again. The problem is that now the people they're putting in the DNA are not there. They're usually, most of them, are corrupt in the system, the justice system, which is corrupt. The Court of Appeals and so on. There are so many people in there who are really bad news, and that's the problem. Because they're talking about a new person coming in the DNA, where there's some very nasty stories about the candidates that are up for those positions. In fact, one of our investigative journalists, Diana Wanshu, she did this case on where a girl who was raped by her uncle was no charges actually stuck against the uncle. The case was dismissed, if I recall, because they said that the girl had cooperated, the 13-year-old girl had cooperated with her uncle. And the judge who made that judgment is one of the candidates now to be the prosecutor in the DNA.
Link one follow the other.
Yeah.
Does anybody, I mean, it seems that there is a kind of an optimistic story here, which is good, i.e. it happens still, but not so much at the bottom or at the top, and that things were a bit better, although they may be getting worse. Anybody want to disagree with that? That more or less seems to be the way things are going. We're going to have to break in a minute, but Vladimir, there's a coffee break here. You can have a coffee break there if you wish.
Okay.
But please stay with us if you can. I don't know how your time is going.
Yes, let's
but,
take.
Can you comment on what we've been talking about?
I had just a short comment because maybe people are hurrying for the coffee, and basically I think Romanian movies, cultural issues are also related to corruption. It's not only economic but also cultural issues. So in Romanian movies, from the recent times, I see a lot of problematization of the so-called transgenerational trauma or something like that, which basically means that the corruption of parents is somehow transferred to the children. And maybe the public knows the movie Baccalaureate, or I don't know how it would be in English, maybe examination or high school examination, and also the movie Metronome, which is a more recent one. I think both of them deal exactly with this issue, how certain children which are unprepared, innocent of course, whenever such thing happens, something happens, some kind of incident, and as a result of that, they're faced with this choice of subscribing to the advice of their parents to somehow choose a corrupt way, or somehow try to resist or try to make something on their own. And I think that is something I very much enjoy about Romanian movies, the fact that this problem of transfer of corruption in generation is conscientized, if I can say, by movie directors. I haven't seen such situation in Bulgarian cinema. Maybe, of course, once again, I'm not knowing anything, but I don't see so much this problem of transgenerational trauma to be understood in Bulgaria so much as I see it in Romania.
Is that right? Is that a major theme of Romanian movies?
It's a good observation, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
A few movies come to mind when you put it like that.
They do what? The movies, they portray a scene of corruption of some kind. And
Yeah, or maybe there are dramatic moments in which a parent comes up with a solution that is not so orthodox, and it's bribing someone to get out of the trouble. Or, yeah, just putting it in a bigger picture, in a bigger story, or a small gesture maybe.
so it's a major theme or at least it's a theme which comes up several times in movies.
Corruption in general.
Small day-to-day corruption that you bribe a doctor or you need to get a thief.
And that's seen as a bad thing. It's not.
It's understood and it's recognized like a bad thing, or by our generation. It's like this culture of exchanging favors, forgetting what you should be already. What?
but you have the right to get.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Russians call it blood.
Blood?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same here.
Yeah.
It's partly, but blood is not just bribery, it can be bribery, but
It can be an exchange of services.
exchange of services. Right.
Like
And
in
that
Russia,
exchange of services is, can be perfectly, you do me a favour.
I can do a favor.
Yeah, and then, oh, I owe you a favour, so that's fine.
We have the same word. We have the same word in Romanian also.
I really
It's
blood.
called in
They make blood. Blood means that they
They understood
arrange.
each other to
They
arrange.
take on agreement and it's used mostly for football. As I
Football.
Yes.
Yes, they make blood.
So
They were
we use the
spoken
term-
like
we use the
beforehand.
term
They
to
spoke.
describe, gate, which was settled before even starting.
Oh, well, that's corruption.
When you say so, yes.
It's the only way my team can win. Tottenham Hotspur. But that's private grief.
There used to be a time in Romania when corruption and the football were very linked. Like a lot of football managers, like I don't know, Becali and from Rapid, Copos, they were on linked, and Mititica all were linked with corruption scandals.
Anyway, the coffee will be getting cold, so let's break for 10 minutes and then another hour for this session afterwards.
Okay.
Vladimir,
Okay.
will come back in 10 minutes?
I'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay.
Thanks very much.